Welcome to Alu Speaks with Alu Patience. Today we'll be discussing on the topic agency theory. This is our fourth topic in the course corporate finance. If you have not watched our previous topic, I would advise you to do so. However, do not worry. I will be breaking today's topic down to be as simple as ABC, as I recognize that most of us here do not have a business-oriented background. At the end of today's class, we will understand what agency theory means and agency relationship. We will find the causes of the agency problems and the solutions to these agency problems. We will also find a way to relate agency problem with the managers and shareholders relationship. Before going into the topic proper, let us first of all lay some foundations. Number one, let's discuss stakeholders and their interests. What are stakeholders or who are stakeholders? A stakeholder is someone that does not only have an interest in the company, but has a degree of relationship with that company and can exert a level of influence over the said company. What am I trying to say here? I'm saying that to be a stakeholder, you must have an interest in the company. You must have a relationship with the company, and you must have an influence in the company. Examples of such stakeholders include the shareholder, the management, the debt holders, the government, the employees, and even the society. So how is the shareholder a stakeholder? They own the company and they have an interest in that company because they have an interest in maximizing their wealth. And if such interest is not met, they can influence that company by pulling out their shares or changing the management team. Now the management are interested in making high profit so as to get high bonuses apart from their salaries, and they influence the business because they control the business and make decisions on behalf of the business. What about the debt holders and the bond holders? They are interested in maximizing the interest on loans, and they would not give the business a loan if the terms on the loans they offer is not favorable to them. The government is interested in the business paying taxes. That is the interest of the government to what? To raise taxes, to collect revenue from the business through taxes. And if the business fails to pay such taxes, they can find such erring businesses. The employees of the business, they are interested in their salary and in good working condition of service so that they can carry out their day-to-day activities. And if this condition is not met, they can influence the company or the business by through strikes and labor and their labor unions. The society, they expect the business to provide them with superior and safe products to consume without any social cost involved, without any negative influence on the society. And if they find that they are not, their interest is not being met, they can cry out. So that's how they influence the business so as to achieve their own interests. From what I have just said that these different stakeholders, they all have their own different interests in the business. And each of these stakeholders, if left to their own device, they would pursue their own self-interest than the interest of other stakeholders. And because humans are naturally selfish and want to pursue their own interests, this will lead to conflict of interest among the various stakeholders. because in trying to satisfy their own personal interest, it will lead to a clash of interest among them. And it is uh, on this clash of interest, and it's on the basis of this conflict of interest that the agency theory was built. So what is agency? Agency is a contractual relationship between the principal and the agent. It is a relationship where the principal hires the agent to represent the interest of the principal. What I'm saying here is that agency is a contract where the principal employs an agent to act on their behalf in decision making and in engaging in activities on behalf of the principal. That is, he is hired by the principal to perform an act of service on his behalf. Meaning that the agent does not only uses the principal's resources, but he also makes decisions, and those decisions and are binding on the principal, which means the decisions that are made by the agent, the risk of those decisions are binding on the principal. Yes, I have been discussing about the principal and the agents. Who is the principal and who is an agent? The principal is a person or group of persons that delegates authority to an agent to carry out an act of service on his behalf. While an agent is a person or group of persons who carries out delegated duties given to him by the agent. That is, the agent is the one who acts on behalf of the principal. Like I said, the agent is hired by the principal to carry out services and decisions on behalf of the principal. But sometimes the agent pursues his personal interest and not the interest of the principal who employed him. So you see, there are situations that will lead to a conflict of interest because the shareholders expect his interest to be pursued, while the agent, the principal expects his interest to be pursued, while the agent is pursuing his own personal self-interest. And because their interests are not aligning, this leads to what? To conflict of interest. And this type of conflict of interest is what is termed agency costs. Agency cost simply means the cost derived as a result of conflict of interest between the principal and the agent. Let us give some examples of where conflict of interest arise. Employees, for instance, they want to get higher salaries. They love to be paid higher salaries. But to pay employees higher salaries, this will affect the dividend of shareholders. So you see, to pursue the interests of employees will be against the interests of what? Of the shareholders. Also, another example is the debt holders. They would love to charge higher interest on loans. But to charge higher interest on loans, to pay higher interest on loans, it means what? It will reduce what? The shareholders' wealth. Even the government would prefer higher taxes. And what does higher tax mean? Higher tax means to reduce shareholders' wealth. Not only will it affect shareholders, it will also affect the society because the shareholders or the company will want to push that cost to the society by increasing the product price. So, with all these examples I've given, we have seen that pursuing the interest of one stakeholder may lead to a conflict in the interest of another stakeholder. However, in these scenarios, most times it is the shareholder that suffers from conflict of interest. If you are still here, please like, subscribe and follow. And do not forget to click on the notification button so that you do not miss out on future amazing topics. Let's digress a bit to separation of ownership and control. In a corporation, there is usually a separation between ownership and control. That is, the shareholders, who are the owners of the company, employ managers who help them control the activities of the company on behalf of the shareholders. The company is owned by the shareholders, but the shareholders cannot manage the companies by themselves, because the shareholders is made up of a large body of owners, and most of them have just little units of shares in the company, so they cannot manage the company themselves. It is not just feasible. So what do? They employ the management to control the company, to manage and control the company on their behalf. This means that shareholders and managers have a principal agent relationship, where the shareholders are the principal and the management are the agents. And this separation of ownership and control is what really leads to the agency problem. Because now we have the principal and the agent, and these two parties may have their own personal interest that may conflict with each other. Since we already know that agency problem arises as a result of conflict of interest among the parties involved, among the between the agent and the principal. The agency problem arises because the agent does not necessarily act in the best interest of the principal, even if it is the principal that employed them, that hired them to work on their behalf. Why is this so? Because man is inherently selfish and tends to pursue his own self-interest. And because the managers are the one that controls the company and manage the company on a day-to-day basis, they usually have more information of the company than the owners themselves. And it's because of this information gap, that is why the management are the ones who make decisions on how the company is run. There is an asymmetry in the level of information about the company between the shareholders and the management, because the shareholders, they do not partake in the day-to-day runnings of the firm, and so they do not have all the information that is available to the manager. With all this I have said, we cannot come back to the question, on what assumption is the agency theory created? The agency theory is created on the assumption that there is a separation in ownership and control. It is based on the assumption that there is a, an information gap between the principal and the agent, that is, between the shareholders and the management. It is on the assumption that people act in their own self-interest, and that the interest of the principal and the agent is misaligned, is usually misaligned. These are the assumptions on which the agency theory was created. Before we discuss the solution to agency problem, let us first really understand what management a conflict of interest is really about. Let's give some examples. So let's create scenarios so that we can understand what management conflict of interest is really about. For instance, it is of management interest to protect their job. That is, their job security is paramount to management. And because of this, they would prefer to take on projects with less risk, irrespective of the fact that there are alternative projects with high risk and high return that will favor the shareholders. Another scenario is when management decides to favor a particular service provider or a particular contractor that may not be best for the company. But because that service provider or contractor has given them incentives, has given them gifts, they may give that service provider or contractor the contracts. Some managers may even award contracts to their own personal company without following due process. Another example is managers may hire family and friends, even if the family and friends they are qualified to do the job, but they are not supposed to hire them because there is a perceived conflict of interest in such an employment structure. Another example is managers wanting to take on short-term profitable projects so that they can cash out on bonus in favor of other viable long-term projects that may be more beneficial to the shareholders on a long run. Another example is management trying to prevent an acquisition, a takeover of the business of the company, because they are afraid that if this takeover occurs, this change may lead to them losing their jobs, and they will put all mechanism in place to discourage such a takeover. This is not for the interest of the shareholders but for their own interest, so that they may not lose their jobs. All these conflicts of interest between the managers and the shareholders, they lead to some costs, some direct costs and some indirect costs. Like the cost that will benefit the managers and not benefit the shareholder, that's a direct cost. Like another cost is the cost of hiring auditors, external auditors, and paying audit fee for them to monitor managers. That's a direct cost. Also, we can even have indirect cost. That's the cost the shareholders have to finally incur in order to fire the managers or to sue them for negligence. They have to incur a cost, litigation cost. These are indirect costs. So all these costs, they are all part of the reasons. They all lead to conflicts because the shareholders do not want to incur this cost, and this leads to conflicts between the shareholders and the management. So how do we reduce this agency problem? What are the ways we can mitigate this agency problem? One of the ways to mitigate agency problem is to draw up strong contractual relationships that will guide the procedure to follow, so as to align the interests of the shareholders and the managers. Another way to reduce this agency problem is to impose restriction in the agency power. That's to restrict the powers of the agent. This will give the principal more confidence in the business. Also, putting mechanism in place to evaluate managers' performance, and that is so as to reward them if they meet those criteria, and to sanction them if they are found wanting. That's another way to reduce this agency problem. And also by insisting on transparency between managers and shareholders, so as to bridge that information gap that exists between them. Since the shareholders' interest is to maximize long-term wealth, it is better. One of the ways to manage this agency problem is to give managers long-term incentives targets, that if they meet this target over this period of years, they will be given cash bonuses. Another way is by voting in a reputable board of directors. That is board of directors that have the interest of the shareholders at heart and not their own interest. Because even the board of directors that were voted in, sometimes they and the managers, they connive together to pursue their own personal self-interest and not the interest of the general shareholding body. Another way to reduce the agency problem between the shareholders and the management is by compensating the managers by paying them with stocks. Such stocks, they could be restricted stocks or non-restricted stocks. By restricted stocks, I mean the managers may not have access to the stocks immediately, and the non-restricted stocks means the managers have access to the stocks immediately. What is the point of doing this. It is believed that making managers shareholders, it will help to align the interest of the managers and the shareholders to be the same interest. However, people have even argued that if you give too many stocks to the management, it will be counterproductive because they will not want to take any risk that will jeopardize their large shares in the company. Another option is giving management stock option. People believe that this is even better than outrightly giving them stocks. This by stock option, I mean giving management the option to buy stock at a certain price if they are able to achieve a target stock price at the end of a period. Also, another method to solve this problem is that shareholders with higher percentage of ownership, they should be actively involved in the management of the company, and those who are able to acquire more shares so that they can have control and say in the management should do so. Also, we can mitigate this problem by creating a periodic and impromptu review of the managers using mechanisms like the external auditors. Another method is for shareholders to try to force the hands of management is by trying to get enough proxies. That is trying to get enough votes so as to force the hands of management. This is through what is called a proxy fight. First of all, what is a proxy? Shareholders who can't attend annual general meeting can vote online or through a card, and that is called a proxy. Therefore, a proxy fight is when shareholders try to gather group of proxies together so that they can align and force a decision on the board of directors or on the management.